just thought it'd be a suggestion.
Dr. Jacqueline Lang is an applied voice instructor at Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa, and at Kirkwood Community College in Iowa City. She is a brilliant lyric soprano. Dr. Lang, you've had a long and varied career as a performer. You're a dancer as well as a singer, I understand. And I believe you actually started your performing career as a dancer rather than a singer. Do you suppose you could walk us through your early career and how it developed and how you got to the point you're at now?
Maybe I should dance through it. I'm just joking. I started as a little girl. I danced tap, ballet, and jazz, and I did that throughout basically up until I got in high school. And then I got one of my first gigs basically dancing as Fairfield, Iowa has that Sondheim Theater, and I was cast as Gymnasia in the production of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum.
Okay. So. And Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum is one of Sondheim's earlier musicals, I believe, and it's about the Roman Empire, correct?
Yes, that it is.
And what was your first love? Was it ballet or tap, or did you just do it all?
Oh boy, I loved it all, but I particularly loved ballet. So, and point.
What's the difference between ballet and modern dance for people who don't know anything about it?
Oh goodness. Well, when I think of ballet, I think of like Russian dancers and the Russian like Swan Lake and kind of that kind of stuff. I know that modern dance is a little more, they have different styles, different movements that they do. I think of Alvin Ailey's group that does stuff with like gospel music, and they do all this kind of neat movement with it. So. And
tap is largely about the movement, but it's also about beating out a rhythm with your feet, correct?
Yes, that's true.
It sounds awfully difficult, is it?
I guess not if you have rhythm, but I didn't find it that difficult. You just kind of get used to it. So.
Do you still do much of that?
No, I don't tap. I might do a time step every now and then just for a joke, but.
And how did you get into singing?
Oh boy, I've been singing pretty much all my life. When I was, again, growing up, after school, I would go home and I would be on my swing set outside, because I loved being outside, and I would be singing all the songs that I learned in school that day and singing my favorites. My sister and I would do that. I didn't find out until later on that basically my neighbors, whenever they would hear me singing, would actually open up their windows and listen to me sing.
Oh my gosh, that must have been flattering when you heard about that later.
That was much later. That wasn't until I was doing my master's degree at New England Conservatory that I found out about that. So it's a much later sort of, yeah.
I'll be darned. Well, when did somebody start suggesting that you might want to sing seriously? Was it when you were a kid or older?
Kind of a combination. The first time I felt really strong about singing was probably, I think, 6th grade or so, when I had a student teacher that said, "Hey, you're really good," and then made me do a duet with him in front of the class, and I nailed it. So that was really.
What was the song? Do you remember?
I don't remember. It was too long ago. And then it probably wasn't until my junior year in college where I had one of my instructors kind of tell me that he saw a lot of potential in me, and that kind of gave me an idea and gave me a light bulb. So.
Did you go into college as a music major?
I was a double major, so yes.
And it was vocal performance and what else?
Chemical engineering.
And have you had much of a career as a chemical engineer, or do you still contemplate one?
Well, clearly, since I've gotten my doctorate in music, the chemical engineering thing is still on the plate. No. I still love science and everything, but chemical engineering and I are not going to be, so.
You've also had a career in financial services, I believe.
Yes, that is true.
So you've really been all over the place.
In a career sense, yes, but I prefer to think of myself as a Renaissance woman.
All right, well, that's a very good thing to be. It's one of my favorite terms, except in my case, of course, I'm a Renaissance man, presumably. Now, then graduated with that double major, and then you went on to a master's degree, I believe,
Yes.
and that was at the New England Conservatory.
Yes, that's correct.
And by that time, had you pretty much solidified your position as a singer rather than as a dancer, or were you still doing both?
At that time, I was definitely into it more as a singer than a dancer. So,
And what sort of singing do you like best to do, and what sort of performances do you usually give? Is it classical or pop or jazz? What?
oh, geez. Well, when you study it, you get to do more of the classically oriented sorts of songs and recitals. So that's kind of what I've geared myself towards. And then obviously that kind of goes coupled with opera. But I love jazz. And some pop music is okay for me too. But yeah, so that's kind of where I lean towards, I guess, are the classical things.
And you've done quite a bit of opera and operetta and musicals. And of all the roles you've played so far, what would you say are your favorites? Ones you had the most fun with?
The most fun, I guess, when the University of Iowa did La Clemenza di Tito, and I got to play Sesto, and Sesto was a guy, and he got to do basically the woman that he gets involved with, wants him to burn down the empire and kind of like knock out the guy that's in charge, and he does it. So I got to actually have a dagger and stuff, so that was cool.
Sounds pretty cool. Now, Sesto is what they call a pants role, I believe. That's a man's part played by a woman.
Yes.
And is it much different playing a pants role than playing a conventional female role?
Absolutely. I had to learn how to hug like a guy and make other, gestures that are more masculine, or not make as many gestures, just so that it seemed more like a male character. And even I had to spend time with the director, changing my walk. So there's a lot that can kind of go into conveying a different gender.
Was that fairly easy to do, or did it take a lot of work?
It took me a lot of thought, I'll be honest.
And then you had the dagger in La Clemenza di Tito, but then didn't you have a shotgun in Susanna a few years before that?
I did with that one. That was also a new one. That was also one of my favorite roles too. She goes through, in the opera,
Susanna is a fairly modern opera, isn't it?
Yeah, it was written in 1954 or so. But basically, so her character goes through a rape by the local minister, and in the process, it's an apocrypha tale based on the Susanna Apocrypha, actually. And some elders see her, bathing in the river, and then they cast her out, and the reverend comes along to kind of put her, to get her to merge with the church, I guess, and he ends up taking her inside and raping her, and then she goes through this change, and that particular opera really spoke to me because I had some of my own personal experiences that I was able to convey in that role, and so it was really powerful to play that one. So. And
then I've seen you also in Patience, Gilbert and Sullivan's operetta. Was that a fun one as well?
It was different. I had to play a lot younger of a character than I am today, and so it was just kind of interesting and fun to, revisit some of my youth.
So, setting aside which ones you enjoyed the most, which roles would you say have been the most challenging for you?
For that one, I would have to say Adina in The Elixir of Love. And the reason why she's difficult, it's really hard to tell. She's seemingly a little more of a colder character in the libretto, and it was hard to convey this feeling of love and that she isn't this complete, mean woman and kind of cold and heartless at it when she throws away Namarino. So
now, The Elixir of Love is an opera that probably most of us are not familiar with. Can you give us a very brief synopsis?
Oh boy.
Synopsis of it?
Sure. It's written by Donizetti, and it's about this young guy who's in love with his girl growing up, and he is desperately in love with her, but he doesn't tell her this. And then through the course of the opera, a drill sergeant comes in, and Adina falls madly in love with him on first sight. She's going after looks, And then when it comes time for the wedding ceremony, she doesn't go through with it because she's realizing that it doesn't feel like the right thing to her. And Nemorino had made his feelings known a little bit, and so then she goes back and goes after Nemorino, and so they end up happily ever after.
And so this was just difficult because of the range of emotions and so on that you had to communicate, correct?
I wouldn't say that. It's for the fact that she seems rather cold-hearted up until the part where it's the very end of the opera, where she's like finally realizing that she's in love with her, best friend growing up, and it's hard, in a sense, to figure out where she feels the love, I guess, and to nail that down. And so you have to, as an actress, choose that. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Now, singing and acting at the same time must be terribly, terribly difficult. And singing is all about communicating, right? So in a situation like that, how do you prepare yourself mentally to communicate the emotions and the personality that you are trying to put across to the audience? Must be much harder for singing than for acting, right?
Well, acting is still conveying emotions because you have things like subtext, and it's the same thing in singing. You want to use that subtext to convey what you're trying to say underneath of the text, and then composers also help you out with subtext and kind of character stuff by giving you the music that's underneath, and so you get an idea of what the character's about and what their intentions are. I actually find that to be the funnest part about singing, is that when you're able to, use a little bit of your own artistry and your interpretation of a character and bring that in, and you get to have that moment of like a freedom, like when you're speaking, it's just kind of there's spontaneity in it, and it ends up being the same thing when you're singing. So I actually find it to be a lot of fun.
And are there any roles that are still on your bucket list, something that you really, really want to play that you haven't done yet?
Well, of course. There are things like Carmen that I would love to play, but I'm not a mezzo-soprano, so maybe my voice lowers a little bit.
But we have certainly seen sopranos playing Carmen, even though it was written for a mezzo. They'll force themselves to go a little bit lower.
Yeah.
So would you jump at the chance if it was given?
Sure, of course I would.
And what is particularly compelling about Carmen, aside from it being such a famous opera?
Oh goodness, I really love the music. I love the habanera rhythm that's, and the music that's involved with that. And plus be fun to play this like really sexy lady that all the guys go after and all that kind of stuff. So just to keep it superficial.
Right, of course. And is there a particular musical era that you are especially fond of, be it Baroque or Romantic or any of the modern genres?
I guess I would have to say Impressionism.
And there weren't a lot of great operas written in the Impressionistic tradition.
No, there were not at that time.
But can you think of some Impressionistic pieces that are particularly good for your voice?
This would more along the lines of be more of like an art song or something like that, where I absolutely adore Debussy and Ravel and those guys. And, I recently, I guess not really recently, maybe in the last year or so, did a recital with the Ariette Oubliée by Debussy, and I really adored those pieces. So.
All right, and lately you've been building up your reputation as a voice coach, teacher as well. Do you give private lessons, and what do they look like?
Of course, I give private lessons. As what they look like, I spend maybe half the lesson working on technique, and then the other half of a lesson working on a song that the student is interested in working on, or kind of like music that they're interested in. And of course, then I try to give them something to challenge them as well.
And how do you go about figuring out what kind of a voice a person has, whether it's got possibilities, or how can you make the best of a really bad voice, or how can you guide a singer into the type of singing that would be best suited to her?
I generally find that everybody kind of has an innate knowledge that they're gravitating towards one particular kind of music versus something else based on how they're feeling about themselves and where they feel like their voices line up. So that then in a lesson situation or as I'm giving advice, I can kind of guide them in that sort of way based on what their goals are. So I haven't had too many people saying, "Ooh, I want to sing opera," and then they really don't have like an operatic sort of sound. And again, you can always find different ways to go about getting into different areas of music as well. So,
is there a certain type of voice that one would consider better suited to opera or better suited to jazz or to chamber type performances?
I guess how I would answer that honestly is that I feel like as a singer you should be able to sing in a lot of different genres and a lot of different places where you can cross over. Again, if you have a larger voice where and people are always telling you you're like, it's too loud or something, that might be something where you might want to gear yourself more towards opera. But then again, it's learning how to sing in these different kinds of music. So you should be able to do it all.
And I understand that there are different types of soprano voices as well, right? You are
Yes.
considered pretty much a lyric soprano. Maybe
Yes.
you can tell us what that consists of and then compare it with, say, a Wagnerian soprano or a soubrette or what have you.
Oh, okay. So let's see, lyric sopranos. You can think of like a Renee Fleming, I guess me, and lyric sopranos generally tend to have like a warmer voice. They have like maybe a medium size of voice. A Wagnerian soprano, those are going to be your voice types that have like a very, very big voice. They can sing over orchestra with 250 instruments in it, that type of thing. Soubrettes are generally light voices, and they sing kind of like the comical characters. So that kind of breaks that down a little bit.
Okay, and the soubrette and the lyric soprano, I suppose, are better suited to chamber type performances as well, like solo recitals and so on.
In a sense, yes. But of course, that music at that time was written with smaller instrumentation or like a smaller group, so it isn't as big of a group.
And then Wagnerian sopranos, stereotypically, they are physically large. Is there a correlation between one's voice and one's physical size?
I'm not really sure about that, but I understand that scientifically there is not, but I don't know. I couldn't answer that for sure.
Of course, back in the Baroque period, you had to compete with castrati as well as with other sopranos. Now, just as a matter of curiosity, do you know much about that era and what the castrato voice sounded like by comparison with a female soprano?
I'm not 100% sure about that because we don't have castrati today that we listen to, but there was also a period of time where women were not allowed to be on the stage. So even in times of Shakespeare, women were not allowed to be on the stage. They weren't allowed to be a part of opera, and that's hence why we kind of have castrati. As that started going along, I know that there were specific roles that were written for castrati, like Sesta was actually one of them. And so that then, these composers writing specific things for the castrati, and it wasn't meant to be a competition with soprano voices.
All right, and one thing I do want to get to in the course of this show is your doctorate. You got your master's degree at the New England Conservatory, then in the fullness of time you came back here to the University of Iowa, and now you have a doctorate of musical arts, is that what it's called?
Yes.
And you are now Dr. Lang, and I'd like you to tell us a little about the process of earning that degree, and then tell us also about the thesis or the dissertation that you wrote to earn it.
What part of the process are you interested in knowing about?
Well, what is the work that goes into earning a doctorate in vocal performance?
Okay, every program is actually going to be a little bit different. At the University of Iowa, there are a lot of academic requirements. The University of Iowa is a Tier 1 academic research institution, meaning that you get to do a lot of research there. And so a part of their program is like you have a lot of theory classes, you have a lot of music history courses, then of course you get your song literature classes, your vocal pedagogy classes, and you have probably about 3 years worth of classes unless you're lucky and you get to have things transfer through. Then as a performance major, you get to do 4 recitals. Through that one, their first one's a qualifying recital, and sometimes people are able to combine that with their first recital. And that's kind of what gets you through that process. You also take comprehensive exams where you get extra questions about topics that you're interested in. And then, of course, then the last piece of it is then doing your DMA essay. So it's actually not a dissertation. And the DMA essay is about actually in a sense, I know you don't have to do original research because there isn't a lot of original stuff in music anymore. We've kind of covered a lot of those things to this date. Not that there's a new area to discover, there are, but I specifically covered comparing the novel of Mice and Men to the opera by Carlisle Floyd.
That's right. I remember reading your essay, as a matter of fact. Tell me some of the conclusions that you draw. I think most of our viewers are familiar with the novel of Mice and Men. It takes place on a farm in California in the 1930s during the Depression, and two itinerant workers end up in a whole lot of trouble on account of one of them's fascination with a young lady. And your essay was about the role of that young lady who is merely known as Curly's wife.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little about that?
What I discovered in my research and in my thesis for this is that her character in the novel is actually ambiguous, and that she's meant to be an enigma, she's meant to be misinterpreted, and in the opera by Carlisle Floyd that she's not actually an enigma anymore, and that through analysis of the music and everything, that I discovered that it was very clear that she's meant to be a temptress and a seductress in the opera.
So how would you do that if you were given the role of Curly's wife in this particular opera? How would you prepare for that part?
I guess I had discovered a book that was by Helen Gurley Brown. Sorry, it's been a while since I've talked about this. That was called Sex and the Single Girl. I would actually take some time to read that. Because she wrote that in the 60s, and that's when Floyd wrote this opera. And I would kind of look at that for some cues, because she gets into things about how to flirt with men and kind of a 60s spin on that, and that's another element that I see in the opera. And I would kind of go about that and kind of take some of those things away. Obviously work with the director on how to really make her character a seductress, and it's going to be all about how your mannerisms on stage. And then in a sense also how you use your voice to carry that sexy energy and that sexiness.
So there's tremendous lot of preparation that goes into a role in an opera or a musical, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And it occurs to me also, maybe you can correct me on this, that sopranos have a reputation for being demanding and kind of bitchy sometimes, and very much the prima donna, as it were. But it occurs to me that there's a reason for that, because she's the centerpiece of the show, and it's got to be perfect, or she's not perfect. Am I correct?
With that show?
With any show.
Not necessarily. I don't know about that. Not every show revolves around the soprano. Would be nice, but I wouldn't say that necessarily. But there is a lot of work.
Sopranos like Kathleen Battle, for example, being very difficult to deal with, and it always occurred to me that maybe she is difficult, but there's a reason for it. I
wouldn't be able to comment about that really. So.
Well, do you consider yourself pretty easy to work with?
I would like to think so, and I haven't heard a word to the otherwise, but...
Nor have I. But somebody who was about your age sitting on that swing set, maybe thinking that they have what it takes to become a singer, what would you tell that kid? What would you encourage her to do and encourage her not to do? What sort of advice and warnings even would you give her?
Well, I know that there are a lot of areas to cover in the music business, and there isn't one clear-cut path to where you're going, and you're going to have to define success for yourself, because it's not going to be the same thing as success to another person, and just to keep all the doors open. There's a lot that you can do in the music industry. And
it's tremendous work, isn't it? Much more than a lot of people would have thought.
Yes, it is. That it is.
What would you say is the hardest period for a singer who has taken approximately the career path? Is it early on? Is it the middle period when you're like an undergraduate? Is it the home stretch when you're working on your doctorate? What's the worst and what's the best?
I really don't know how to answer that, just because I'm like, it's probably all of it. But it was definitely hard after the master's degree when you're trying to figure out, how do I make adult life work and how do I keep music as a part of that? And even with the doctorate, I'm still trying to figure that out.
And what are some of the worst mistakes that a singer can make that you can warn them not to make, either in their technical performance or in the way they manage their career?
That's a good question that I don't know if I have a great answer to at the moment.
Well, let's start with supposing you're working with a very beginner, like me, for example, a relative tyro. What are some of the commonest mistakes you see in that kind of singer, and how do you train them out of your students?
Okay, the first thing that jumps to my mind is posture. That in a beginner singer that I see a lot of head tilting up, and so I spend a lot of time working my singer to get them to keep their head
That's right.
down.
That's a bad habit of mine, which you have pointed out to me once or twice.
I try.
And do you find that most people are able to get a good sense of pitch and are able to carry a tune, or are there people out there who really are tone deaf?
I wouldn't say that there are people who are tone deaf. I've never actually come across someone who cannot completely match pitch. I have had an interesting time working with singers at the beginning who've never had singing as kids, and so they're coming to it as adult. And I find that sometimes that they're able to match pitch low and they're able to match pitch high, and there's this in between where they're not able to. And I had to spend time working with them to get to understand that middle section of their voice.
And what are some of the worst problems that singers have with diction? I'm always worried. Am I making people hear the words properly? What are some of the tricks that you can use to make your words more distinct?
The first thing that comes to my mind is making sure you sing through your diphthongs. So a word has two vowels together, like in the word mine, make sure you're giving the ah and the e some time together. So mine.
And
That.
one of my problems that I'm trying to train out of myself is I spend too much time on the consonants and not enough on the vowels. But are there some singers who are more comfortable with consonants and others that are more comfortable with vowels?
No, I think everybody wants to sing vowels and everybody struggles with consonants a little bit. So
That's been my experience also.
they get in the way every time.
Now, if you were putting together a recital that you were going to give just for the sheer hell of it and you just wanted to have a lot of fun with it, can you tell me some of the selections that you would choose for yourself if it was just a solo recital, maybe you and an accompanist?
Goodness, I really wouldn't be able to narrow that down, just because I'm like, there are just so many songs. I come across things just accidentally sometimes, but I would definitely lean towards composers like Debussy. I love Joseph Marx. Korngold is another composer I'm interested in getting into at some point in time, and so it's just kind of about what I discover along the way.
And are there any pop or jazz singers that you particularly admire whose work you might like to cover at some point?
Sure, I can think of one person, Jane Monheit. She has a great sound, and I love her jazz style. So.
Okay, I don't think I have ever heard you sing jazz, so that would be one hell of a new experience, I'm sure.
I know, most people think I'm only an opera singer, and it's so not true. I actually like singing jazz too. So.
Okay, very good. Well, I would love to hear you do that. I would love to hear as many solo recitals and operatic performances from you as you would care to give, because you're an absolute delight every time I hear you. And on that note, thank you very much, Jacqueline Lang, and thank you all.